Elara Devereux always believed her life was a fairy tale. At 16, her world shimmered with a dreamlike beauty that few could imagine. She lived in an opulent estate perched above the Seine River in Paris, where morning sunlight spilled through cathedral-like windows onto polished marble floors, and crystal chandeliers scattered rainbow fragments like scattered jewels across the rooms. Fresh roses were delivered daily, ranged in antique vases placed with obsessive care. Her every morning began with the rustle of silk, the scent of lavender oils, and the sound of Chopin echoing faintly from a grand piano in the East Wing. The estate, a mansion steeped in generations of aristocratic taste, was as much a character in her life as the people who inhabited it. Her mother, Vivienne Devereux, was the queen of this ivory tower realm. At 42, Vivienne exuded grace like perfume at gold, intoxicating and calculated. Her platinum blonde hair never dared float of place. Her couture gowns were stitched by the finest hands in Paris. Her heels clicked like a metronome on the marble halls, and her voice was always composed, velvet-trap steel. People spoke of her in reverent tones, though no one really knew her. Vivienne ruled her home the way monarchs ruled kingdoms, with complete control. Elara, her only child, was raised in deliberate isolation. Her world was confined to the walls of the estate. There were no sleepovers, no friends, no city walks. There was no need. Her mother insisted. The outside world was polluted, vulgar, and dangerous. Elara was to be preserved like a rare book, unopened yet revered. "You are not like other girls, my darling," Vivienne would whisper each night as she brushed Elara's long auburn hair in front of the gilded vanity. "You are exquisite, rare." And Elara believed her. Why wouldn't she? Her days were measured in musical scales, literature recitals, and philosophical debates with private tutors. She spoke fluent French, English, Italian, and Mandarin. She could analyze Nietzsche before breakfast, perform a nocturne by nightfall, and walk with the poise of a rail. Her beauty was a theory ultimately. It was her mind her mother prized most. She was, in every sense, crafted, but beneath the polish, something pulsated restlessness she did not yet understand. One crisp October morning, Elara was in her music room, mid-violin passage, when her mother entered, her expression radiant with barely restrained excitement. Vivienne rarely showed emotion, so the glint in her eyes gave Elara pause. "Darling," she said, settling gracefully into a velvet chair, "the most remarkable opportunity has just arrived." Elara lowered her bow. "What kind of opportunity?" Vivienne's eyes sparkled. "Do you remember Madame Isolde?" Elara nodded slowly. Madame Isolde was a name wrapped in mystery, a tall woman with silver hair coiled like a crown, eyes that shimmered with something unreadable. She visited occasionally, always late in the day, her conversations with Vivienne conducted in hushed tones behind closed doors. Each time she came, Elara was made to perform, play piano, recite poetry, even dance, all while Isolde watched with a gaze that made her skin crawl. "She has extended an invitation," Vivienne continued, her voice soaked in honey. "An exclusive cultural exchange program. Only the most gifted young women are chosen. You'll travel through Europe, perform in salons, meet dignitaries, artists, scholars." Elara blinked. "I would leave the estate." Vivienne smiled. "Yes, it is time." The word felt like a key turning in a long locked door. Excitement and fear collided in her chest. Where would I go? Private events, estates, gatherings that appreciate excellence. "You will be representing the Devereux legacy." There was pride in her mother's voice, but also something else, a something harder to name, a shadow behind the light. Elara was too overwhelmed to notice. For the next 3 weeks, the mansion pulsed with feverish energy. New tutors were summoned to perfect what was already flawless. Gowns arrived, daily silk, chiffon, and lace creations in hues that shimmered under candlelight. Elara practiced until her fingers cramped and her smile ached. Vivienne watched every moment, correcting posture, polishing pronunciation, adjusting tone. "You must be luminous, but not arrogant, magnetic, but untouched," Vivienne instructed as a seamstress pinned a sapphire gown to Elara's waist. "You are the embodiment of beauty and grace in a world that has forgotten refinement. Elar drank in the praise like holy water. She wanted to be worthy. She needed to be perfect. But small moments began to unsettle her. She'd catch her mother's hands trembling when she thought no one was looking. Her voice, always measured, would sometimes quiver for a second too long. The way she lingered in Elar's doorway at night, staring just a little too long, as if memorizing her. And then came the necklace. The night before departure, Vivian entered her room holding a small velvet box. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said, her voice softer than Elar had ever heard. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a bird pendant mid-flight. "Wear it always." "Why have I never heard of her?" Elar asked. Vivian looked away. "Just remember that you are loved, no matter what happens." The words landed strangely, but Elar, wrapped in silk and anticipation, nodded and fastened the pendant round her neck. At dawn, a black limousine arrived. Elar had never seen anything so sleek. The doors opened to reveal Madame Isolde, dressed in black, her silver hair glowing like moonlight. "You look exquisite, my dear," she said in a voice that slid like silk across skin. They drove through Paris as the sky turned gold. Elar pressed her face to the window, watching the Eiffel Tower rise like an iron sentinel. Everything she'd only seen in books rushed past her like a dream. They arrived at a building that looked like an exclusive club and marked, but screaming luxury. Inside, she was escorted through corridors lined with paintings and gold sconces. A suite awaited her, overflowing with dresses, jewels, and a full styling team. She sat numbly as stylists transformed her. Her hair was twisted into an elaborate updo. A white silk gown clung to her frame like mist. Jewels, cold and brilliant, were clasped around her neck and wrists. When she looked in the mirror, Elar didn't recognize herself. "You are perfection," Madame Isolde declared. "The jewel of tonight's collection." Collection? The word prickled her skin, but no one answered. She was led to a chamber with velvet curtains and hushed voices. She expected a concert hall. What she found was a stage, a low platform, rows of shadowed figures seated in silence. Cigar smoke curled in the air, a tension like electricity before a storm hung heavy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Madame Isolde's voice echoed, "tonight we present a masterpiece. 16 years old, trained in the arts, fluent in 4 languages, pure, exceptional." Elar froze. The room wasn't a salon, it was a showroom, and she was the merchandise. Her heart pounded so violently she thought she might faint. The bidding began. Numbers flew in multiple languages, each one absurd. They weren't buying art, they were buying her, and none of them looked ashamed. Some men watched her with hunger, others with cold evaluation. She looked for a kind faciony sign of humanity. There was none, until one voice cut through the crowd. "Low, come, final." The room went silent. The bid was so high, no one countered. Heads turned to the speaker, a man in a tailored black suit, his face shadowed, his posture still. When Madame Isolde announced "sold" to Mr. Vallemont, the man stepped into the light. Lucien Vallemont. He was older than the others, perhaps late 30s, with dark hair touched with silver and eyes that were unreadable, intelligent, sad. He looked at her not with possession, but something deeper, like he saw the person, not the product. He signed the paperwork with practiced ease. Then he looked at her. "Elar Devereux," he said, "you will come with me now." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was a sentence. The car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine and the soft lilt of foreign languages drifting from Lucien Vallemont's phone. He spoke fluidly in Italian, then in clipped Spanish, discussing logistics, issuing quiet orders. Elar sat across from him in the plush leather seats, the scent of cologne and leather thick in the air. Her hands trembled in her lap, fingers clutching the hem of her silk gown like it might anchor her to reality. She didn't cry, not yet. The golden bird pendant at her throat felt like a leaf freedom forged in metal. Her mind spun wildly. Hours ago, she had been practicing piano under a crystal chandelier. Now, she was property. Lucien offered her water in a glass bottle. She shook her head. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You are safe, safe." The word ricocheted inside her like a cruel joke. "Am I?" He didn't respond. His silence was not indifference. It felt more like a confession. The scenery outside the tinted windows changed slowly, Paris giving way to the countryside, then snow-tipped mountains. They crossed borders without stopping. Alara watched glimpses of real life through the glass. Mothers holding children, couples laughing outside cafes, students with books and backpacks. Her chest tightened with every passing moment. She had never known what she was missing, and now that it was out of reach, it hurt more than anything. By dawn, they arrived at his estate. Alara had expected a fortress, gold, metallic, and clinical, but Lucien's estate was carved into the cliffs of the Italian Riviera, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Dawn painted the water in shades of rose and gold. The villa rose out of the rock as if born of Iden architectural marvel, cloak in elegance. If beauty could be a trap, this was it. A woman waited at the grand entryway. Her hands were weathered, her eyes kind. "This is Mariette," Lucien said. "She will assist you." Mariette gave a small, respectful nod. "Welcome, Miss Devereux." Alara followed her down a long hallway where sunlight filtered through arched windows, casting warm patterns on marble floors. The sea breeze slipped in from the open balcony doors, perfumed with rosemary and salt. It was breathtaking. It was a cage. Her suite was larger than any room she'd ever seen. A canopy bed with sheer drapes, French doors opening to a private balcony, silk curtains, all paintings, and a sitting room with a grand piano that gleamed in the light. Books lined the shelves in multiple languages. Everything was perfect, too perfect. "This is your home now," Mariette said gently, sensing Alara's confusion. "If you need anything, I'm nearby." She left quietly. Alara stood motionless for a long time, the weight of her situation finally pressing down like an avalanche. She walked to the mirror, an ornate piece framed in gold leaf, and stared at the girl looking back. White silk clung to her body. Diamonds sparkled at her ears. She looked elegant, grown, otherworldly, but beneath the perfection, her eyes were wide and hollow. A beautiful prisoner. She unclasped the necklace, let the golden bird fall onto the marble counter, and whispered, "You lied to me." Then, finally, she wept. The next morning, Alara woke to the distant crash of waves and the scent of coffee and warm pastry. For a moment, just once, she imagined it was a dream, that she would rise, return to her music lesson, and forget the auction ever happened. But then she saw the room, the silk sheets, the unfamiliar sky beyond the balcony. This wasn't Paris. There was a knock at the door. Mariette entered with a tray of breakfast berries, croissants, espresso, butter on porcelain dishes. "Good morning, miss," she said softly. "Mr. Valamont thought you might prefer to dine in your suite, given the circumstances." The words made her throat tighten. "Where is he?" "In the study. He's asked that you rest today." Alara nodded numbly. "Would you like a bath?" Mariette asked. "The sea salts here are quite healing." Alara nodded again, too hollow to argue. The bath was steaming, scented with lavender and eucalyptus. Alara sank into it, letting the heat wrap around her like armor. When she emerged, towels waited, and in the wardrobe without explanation was a selection of new clothes, gowns, loungewear, silk slippers, all perfectly fitted, all chosen without her input, as if someone had measured her soul and dressed it in luxury. She dressed and wandered the suite. Every item was beautiful, but every window had reinforced glass. The balcony, though open, overlooked a sheer cliff. A fall would be final. The suite door led to a corridor ending in a locked exit. Luxury was her prison. Velvet-lined, gold-embellished, but still a prison. She returned to the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then moved instinctively into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The melody filled the space like a ghost returning to its home. Her mind, her body, had been violated by fear, but her music remained untouched. It had always been hers. Note after note, she poured her heart into the piece of grief, the confusion, the fury. Her body trembled as she played, but her soul remembered what freedom felt like in those notes. She was mid-phrase when she felt a presence behind her. She turned. Lucien stood in the doorway, still dressed in the tailored black suit from the night before, but his tie was undone, his hair slightly mussed, like he had run his hands through it many times. He said nothing. Elara's hands froze on the keys. "Don't stop," he said softly. "Please." She rose. "I am not here to entertain you." His lips twitched barely. "No," he said. "You're not." He moved slowly, as though approaching a wild animal, and took a seat in an armchair near the balcony. He kept his distance. There was no command in his voice, no hunger in his eyes, only gravity. "You must have questions," he said. Elara laughed bitterly. "Questions? I was bought by a stranger and dragged across borders to be imprisoned in a golden cage. What could I possibly want to know?" Lucien's jaw tensed. "We're not on an island. This is the Ligurian coast, and your right questions aren't enough." He paused. "What happened to you, what your mother did to you, was inexcusable." Elara clenched her fists. "And what you did." He met her gaze. "I bought you." The honesty struck like a slap. "But not for the reasons you think." She folded her arms. "Then enlighten me." Lucien stood and walked to the grand window. The sea reflected in his eyes. "5 years ago," he said slowly, "my younger sister, Celeste, was sold. She was 17, beautiful, brilliant, like you." Elara's breath caught. "I had been tracking Madame Isolde's network for months, gathering evidence, planning to expose them. But I was too late." His voice dropped. "She was sold to a man in Dubai. I found her a year later. She had taken her own life." The words shattered the room's silence. "I vowed then I would destroy them all, every link in the chain, every buyer, every seller. But to do that, I had to become part of it. I had to infiltrate the darkness." Elar gripped the piano bench. "So you bought me to save me?" she asked. He turned, meeting her eyes. "Yes, and to use you to take them down." Lucien led her to the sitting room. On the coffee table lay photographs, files, and documents in multiple languages. Faces of girls, transaction records, flights, names. "This isn't just about Madame Isolde," he said. "It's a global syndicate. Politicians, oligarchs, royal families, hundreds of girls, groomed and sold under the guise of cultural exchanges, elite education, artistic mentorship." He showed her photos, young women with vacant smiles and glassy eyes, educated, elegant, fluent in 5 languages, broken. "Your mother," Lucien said gently, "was one of them." Elar froze. Her name was Vivienne Dubois then, a baker's daughter from Lyon. She was sold at 18. She became a recruiter to survive. Elar stared at the bird pendant in her hand. "She said it belonged to her mother." "It did," Lucien said softly, "to the grandmother you never knew." He leaned in. "Your mother raised you to be perfect, not to destroy you, but to increase your value." In her twisted logic, it was a way to protect you. "She chose me." "Why?" Elar whispered. "Because I wasn't like them. She knew what happened to my sister." Tears welled in Elar's eyes. Lucien stepped back. "I will not force you to do anything. You have a choice." He pointed to the window. "You can stay. I will give you every comfort, every protection. Or you can help me. Help me burn this empire of human misery to the ground." She stared at the sea, glittering under the midday sun. It looked like freedom, but she knew better now. It was just another illusion. "I want to know everything," she said finally. "Everything about my mother, about this network, about what you're planning." He nodded. "Then come with me." Elar stood at the threshold of Lucien Valamont's private study, her breath tight in her throat as she stepped into the war room. That was the only word for it. This was not a gentleman's retreat with mahogany shelves and brandy carts. It was a command center built in the quiet of grief, rage, and precision. The air hummed with tension, the walls lined with corkboards pinned with photographs, maps, and strings connecting cities across continents. Documents were stacked in manila folders. Laptops lay open on tables beside black binders marked with coded names and symbols she did not recognize. Everything was organized with the cold efficiency of a soldier at war. Lucien stood at the center, one hand resting on the back of a leather chair, the other flipping through photographs of girls. Girls like her, girls who never made it back. She felt the burn of bile rise in her throat. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You said you'd show me everything," she said. He nodded and gestured for her to sit. As she sank into the chair, Lucien pushed a thick folder toward her. The cover bore no name, only a single golden feather embossed into the leather. She opened-eyed and her world splintered. There were photographs, first portraits of girls aged anywhere from 12 to 20, each perfectly poised, perfectly dressed, their eyes hauntingly vacant. Alar saw herself in every one of them, the cultivated elegance, the polished speech, the illusion of privilege. And she saw the darkness behind it all. "These are the chosen," Lucien said, voice low. They were raised in luxury, given world-class educations, groomed for talent showcases, music recitals, gallery exhibitions, and then sold. He laid out the timeline. The trafficking begins years before the auction. Families are targeted often from noble lineages that have fallen on hard times, or artists and intellectuals with secrets. The parents agree to elite training programs for their daughters. They sign away guardianship under the promise of exposure to the global elite. Alar flipped a page. Photos of boarding schools, finishing programs, cultural exchanges with innocent names, and glossy brochures. All affront, Lucien continued. These institutions are run by handlespeople like Madame Isolde will raise the girls like art projects. Their beauty, obedience, and intellect are curated to fit buyer preferences. Alar felt the heat of shame burn her skin. "I thought I was special." "You were," Lucien said gently. "That's what makes it work." She blinked away tears. He pulled a smaller folder from the stack. Her mother's name was printed across the top. Vivienne Dubois. Alar hesitated, then opened it. Her mother looked young in the black and white photo, no makeup, long unstyled hair, a wide smile that barely resembled the woman Alar had known. She wore a plain dress, a paintbrush in hand. She was a prodigy, Lucien explained, an artist with natural charisma, recruited at 18 under the guise of a grant to study at a prestigious art institute in Vienna. Alar turned the page. Records of transfer, flight logs. "These are approvals, all forged," Lucien said. "She was sold to a French industrialist who later became your father." Alar froze. "My father," she repeated. Lucien nodded solemnly. "His name was Christophe Renard. He legitimized your mother's new identity and gave her wealth and status. But it came at a cost. She was still owned, still watched. And me." Lucien hesitated. "You were her second chance." Alar closed the folder, chest aching. "She taught me piano and philosophy while preparing me to be sold. She trained you to survive," Lucien said quietly. "She knew the system wouldn't spare you. So she chose who would buy you." "You," Alar said, her voice a whisper. "She contacted me through an intermediary. She knew who I was, what happened to Celeste. She hoped I would save you." Alar turned away. "Why didn't she leave with me? Why didn't she stop them?" "Because she was part of them," Lucien answered. "She thought by complying, she was protecting you, but she was also complicit." Lucien placed another file on the desk. "Your mother wasn't the only one," he said. "She had a sister, Amélie Rousseau." The name struck a chord familiar, yet foreign. "She escaped the network 20 years ago, faked her death, went underground, and began working with law enforcement. She's alive." Lucien nodded. "She's been tracking you for years. She's the one who tipped me off about the Monaco auction." Alar gripped the edge of the desk. "She wanted to save us both. She still does. She's waiting for you in a safe house in Geneva." The room tilted. Her entire life had been crafted like a performance. The people she loved had played parts in a production she never agreed to star in. She had never been a daughter. She had been a product, a transaction, a legacy of survival disguised as tradition. And yet her blood carried both sides now, the architect and the rebel. "I'll help you," Alar said at last. Lucien stilled. Are you sure? I'm done being the performance, she said. But I have conditions. He nodded. I want to meet Amelie. I want to know everything about my family. And I want to be free when this is over. No more chains. Not even golden ones. Done, Lucien said. She stepped closer to the window. The sea shimmered below the cliffs, vast and calm. It looked like freedom. But now, Elar knew better. Freedom wasn't scenery. It was truth. And truth came with a cost. What's the plan? She asked. Lucien crossed his arms. Tomorrow night, Monaco. There's another auction. 3 girls, all under 17. If we can record the proceedings, it will be enough to trigger international intervention. How? He gestured to a case on the table. We disguise ourselves. You'll go as my latest acquisition. They'll expect it. And the recording? He opened the case. Inside were emerald earrings and a jeweled bracelet, hidden microphones, high-range receivers. The diamonds are real, but the secrets they carry are more valuable. Elar picked up one earring, its facets glittering in the light. This is what we use to destroy them, she murmured. Lucien's expression darkened. With the truth, yes. That night, Mariette helped her prepare a green silk gown molded to Elara's body, elegant yet ethereal. Her hair was pinned in waves, her lips painted crimson, her eyes framed with smoky charcoal. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a girl who had been trained to be Aunt, but now wore the costume of her captors as armor. Lucien entered. His black tuxedo fit perfectly, a predator in a ballroom of wolves. But there was something different in the way he looked at her Nala's strategy. More reverence. You look, he began, then stopped. I know, Elar said. A masterpiece. He offered his arm. Ready. Elar lifted her chin. Let's go burn their world down. The lights of Monaco shimmered like a crown pressed against the sea. Beneath its grandeur casinos, yachts, champagne villas lay a darker empire, hidden in shadowed corridors and whispered invitations. It was the kingdom of masks where men in tailored suits but lives with the same ease they bought art. Tonight, Elar Devereux would walk straight into its heart. Inside Lucien Valamont's private jet, she sat across from him, her green silk gown perfectly draped, her earrings glinting like truth laced in emeralds. She looked composed, untouchable, but under her calm exterior, her pulse beat like a war drum. You remember the cues? Lucien asked, adjusting his cufflinks. Elar nodded. 3 taps means stay alert. A squeeze means good job. Firm pressure means danger. His hand grazed her lower back in demonstration. It wasn't romantic. It was strategy. Every glance, every gesture tonight had to be performance. I've memorized the list of bidders, she added, her voice cool, including Baron Voss and Victor Sarov. Lucien's eyes flickered with approval. Good. And remember, you're not the victim tonight. You're the weapon. The plane touched down at a private airstrip. A limousine waited. By the time they arrived at the casino's underground suite, Elar was no longer the frightened girl who'd been sold. She had become the storm cloaked in silk. The private wing of the Monaco casino looked like something from a dream or a nightmare. Gold chandeliers, velvet walls, a string quartet playing Mozart. Wealth glittered in every corner, but beneath it was rot. Elar could feel it like a scent. Old money and freshly bottled sin. Men and women in designer couture milled about, sipping champagne and murmuring in clipped European tongues. No one asked names. Everyone recognized each other. They didn't need names. They had price tags. Lucien's hand guided her through the crowd. Smile, he whispered. She obeyed, perfecting the mask she'd worn her entire life. The practiced grace, the slight tilt of the head, the eyes that sparkled just enough. They passed Countess Armand, rumored to run an elite finishing school in Vienna, a hedge fund mogul from Silicon Valley, a Russian ambassador's son, all of them smiling, bowing, trading pleasantries like this was nothing more than a gala. And then, a voice like silver bells laced with poison. Mr. Valamont. Elar turned. Madame Isolde emerged from the crowd like a ghost dressed in Dior. Her silver hair was sculpted into an elegant chignon, her gown a shimmering shade of black that swallowed light. And Miss Devereux, she smelled like a spider inspecting her web. You look positively radiant. I trust you've adjusted to your new life. The question was a dagger wrap in silk. Elara tilted her head. It's been educational. Madame Isolde's eyes sparkled with amusement. I always believed you were exceptional. Shall we? She led them into the next room. The auction suite was smaller than the one in Paris, but more intimate, more dangerous. Velvet armchairs circled a small stage. Abstract art covered the burgundy walls. Waiters moved silently with trays of bourbon and cigars. Low music played like a lullaby for monsters. Elara's stomach turned, but she kept her face serene. Lucien took a seat near the front. Elara sat beside him, her smile a polished shield. Then the girls were brought in, 3 of them, none older than 17, dressed in couture gowns, their eyes wide, blinking against the stage lights like trapped deer. Elara's heart clenched. She saw herself in each one. One girl was blonde, tall, with trembling hands. Another darker-skinned, with a pianist's posture. The last, smallest of the 3, stared at the floor with glassy detachment, as if her soul had already left. The room hushed. Madame Isolde stepped onto the stage, her voice smooth. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's offerings are of the highest pedigree, raised and educated in elite institutions. Talented, multilingual, obedient, and unspoiled. The words hit Elara like a slap. This wasn't an auction, it was a desecration, and the crowd applauded. The first girl was presented as Lot 3. Her violin skills were mentioned, as was her fluency in Russian and German. Baron Voss raised his hand first. Elara, Lucien murmured. She pressed her bracelet. A silent click signaled the audio device to activate. Across the room, a Saudi oil magnet counterbid, then a South American arms dealer. The girl's eyes darted from man to man as her price climbed. 2 million, 2.33. She went to Baron Voss. The next was the pianist. She was sold for €4,000,000 to a masked bidder whose name was never spoken aloud. Elara's hand trembled beneath her gown. The third girl never spoke. She didn't look up. She fetched the highest price. 7 million, bought by a tech billionaire from San Francisco who sipped champagne as if he were shopping for a yacht. Elara pressed her fingers against her thigh to stop from shaking. Every part of her wanted to scream, to lunge, to tear the masks from every face in the room. Instead, she smiled and recorded. As the room erupted into soft applause and murmured congratulations, Elara felt a shift. A chill crawled down her spine. Then she saw her, across the room, standing tall in heels that gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Platinum blonde hair, a gown of slate blue, perfect posture, and unshakable grace. Vivienne Devereux, her mother, time slewed. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, Vivienne's mask cracked. In her expression, Elara saw guilt, fear, and something dangerously close to love. She approached, arms open. Elara, she said, voice warm. Darling, you look magnificent. Elara stiffened as her mother embraced her. The silk of her gown, the chill of her perfume all felt like memory weaponized. Then, discreetly, Vivienne pressed something into her palm. A small, hard object. A message. I'm so proud, Vivienne said aloud. Lucien has done wonders with you. To the onlookers, it was a mother's blessing. To Elara, it was a warning. Back at the villa, Lucien shut the door to the study and activated the vault's security locks. What did she give you? He asked. Elara opened her hand. A silver tube small enough to be mistaken for lipstick. Lucien's brow furrowed. He took it, unscrewed the cap. Inside, a military-grade signal detector. Someone knows, he said grimly. She was warning us. Someone suspects we were recording. As if summoned by fate, Thomas Lucien's assistant burst into the room, face pale. Sir, we have a problem. Lucien turned sharply. Go. Multiple vehicles approaching. They're jamming our comms. It's coordinated. Lucien's jaw clenched. They're coming for us. Elara's pulse thundered. What do? We hold, Lucien said. He pressed a button. The room transformed. Bulletproof shutters slid over the windows. Walls retracted, revealing weapon caches, monitors, encrypted comms. The Villa Lars prison was now a fortress. Lucien handed her a pistol. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Alar checked the safety, just as he taught her. No, she said. This is exactly what I signed up for. The assault came in waves. Black SUVs roared up the cliffside road. Lights off, loaded with mercenaries. Men in tactical gear stormed the perimeter, armed with silencers and gas. But Lucien had prepared. Steel barriers rose from the drive. Sniper towers activated. Drones launched into the sky. Inside, Alara crouched beside Lucien, relaying signals to their allies abroad. Backup was hours away, but the data they had gathered would change everything. Gunfire echoed in the cliffs. Shattered glass, flashbangs, smoke curling like ghosts. Alara fired her first shot, then her second. She wasn't afraid. She was rage in silk. Justice with a diamond trigger, and when dawn broke over the blood-stained cliffs, she and Lucien stood side by side, bruised, breathless, but alive. The evidence Alar had collected combined with Lucien's 5 years of investigation was detonated across the globe in a wave of calculated disclosures. Interpol raids, political resignations, media firestorms. Madame Isolde was found dead in her Paris apartment. As suicide, they said, but no one believed it. Baron Voss was arrested at his Swiss estate, caught mid-flight plan. The billionaire in San Francisco fled only to be caught by federal agents as he boarded his yacht. And Vivian Devereux surrendered willingly. She testified against dozens of key figures in closed sessions. Her revelations led to the collapse of the trafficking ring. She died 3 days before her public testimony. A heart attack, they said. Alara believed it was her mother's final act of defiance, not just against the system but against herself. A year had passed since the night Monaco burned. The world had changed. Names once whispered in hushed reverence now echoed through courtrooms. Billionaires, diplomats, aristocrats, tentacle shadows who had traded in flesh and silence were being dragged into light. But change on paper was never as fast as change in the heart. Alara Devereux stood barefoot on the stone balcony of a villa in Switzerland, wrapped in a soft wool shawl. Below her, Lake Geneva shimmered, calm and blue. No cliffs, no cages, just gentle morning wind and the soft scent of pine. Here, the silence was clean, not the silence of secrets but of peace. She breathed deeply. Freedom still surprised her. The woman seated in the kitchen looked nothing like the polished ghosts of Alara's childhood. Amélie Rousseau wore jeans and a linen blouse, her dark curls streaked with silver, her face lined with years that had clearly been hard, bitter eyes. They were kind, fierce, and when she smiled, it felt like sunlight through storm clouds. You have your mother's stubborn mouth, Amélie said over breakfast, stirring cream into her coffee, but your grandmother's eyes. God help us all. Alara laughed softly. I'm still deciding whether that's a compliment. It's both, Amélie said, but more compliment than curse. They had met for the first time 3 months ago, after the final wave of court proceedings. Alara had stood in the Geneva safe house, waiting, bracing herself for disappointment. But Amélie had opened the door like a mother might. She hadn't stared or apologized. She had simply opened her arms and said, "You're home." No performance, no perfection, just family. And Alara had collapsed into her. That first hug had said what years of lies could not. He came twice a month, sometimes more. Lucien Valemon arrived without ceremony, no guards, no drivers, no black suits. He wore rolled sleeves, carried leather-bound notebooks, and always brought something for the garden. Flowers, books, soil from his estate. Once, a sapling. They didn't talk about Monaco. They didn't need to. Their conversations were unhurried now about philosophy, music, the foundation they were building for survivors. He never touched her unless she reached first. He never assumed she needed saving anymore. He simply stayed, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. One night, as they stood side by side watching the lake shimmer beneath the moon, he asked, "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if none of it had happened?" Alara considered the question carefully. "I used to," she said. "I used to wonder what it would have felt like to grow up in the world instead of being prepared for it like a product on display. But now, I think about what I'm building instead. Lucien nodded, silent. And you, she asked. I used to think about who I was before my sister died, he said. Now, I think about who I'm allowed to become because you survived. Alara looked at him. They had both emerged from darkness. Scarred, yes, but breathing. Alive. It was called the Nocturne Initiativum after the Chopin piece Alara had played on her first day of captivity. The music that had survived even when she hadn't known if she would. Together, she and Lucien funded homes for girls rescued from trafficking rings. They offered therapy, education, passports, and most importantly, choice. The three girls from the Monaco auction had become their first residents. The pianist, named Meyer, had begun composing her own music. The quiet one, Ines, was learning sculpture. She rarely spoke, but her hands told stories. And the tall, trembling blonde Clarino taught self-defense classes. They were still healing. Some days were harder than others, but for the first time, they were safe. And they were no longer alone. Alara spent hours with them reading, talking, listening. She didn't pretend to be whole. She didn't preach recovery like a sermon. She just showed up. And slowly, they began to believe they might deserve joy again. Weeks after Vivian's death, Alara received a journal, found in protective custody. It was her mother's. The pages were neatly written, precise, the kind of precision Alara had been raised with. But the words inside were different. Vivian wrote of fear, of loss, of love twisted by survival. She wrote of Christophe Renard Alara's father Woe had bought her and later died of illness, leaving Vivian with everything but peace. She wrote about Amélie, the sister she had betrayed, but never stopped loving, about choosing Lucien, about praying, in her own way, that Alara would one day hate her enough to live free of her. I sold you to save you, one entry read. If that is the final act of my life, let it be the one that frees yours. Alara cried for hours, not because it made it right, but because, somehow, it helped her let go. In the evenings, Alara played again, but now, the notes weren't polished for display. They were messy, emotional, full of feeling. Some nights she played for no one. Some nights Lucien listened from the doorway, saying nothing. Once, he joined her. Their hands found harmonies, and in that fragile melody, they discovered something sacred to those souls learning how to rebuild. Not out of guilt, not out of pain, but because music was what remained when everything else had been taken. Their love didn't explode. It didn't burn wildly or demand grand gestures. It grew in quiet corners, in shared silence, in the way Lucien brewed tea without asking, in the way Alara pressed her hand to his chest when nightmares woke him, in the way neither flinched at the mention of the past. They never called it what it was, not yet, but when Alara leaned her head on his shoulder one night, watching the moon ripple over the lake, he didn't move. And she didn't need to explain. Alara stood one morning in front of a group of girls newly arrived at the Geneva home. They were still bruised by the world, still broken in ways they didn't yet know how to speak. She didn't lecture. Instead, she told them a story about a girl who lived in a palace made of lies, about a mother who broke her, and a man who bought her, and how the girl learned that her worth was not written in silk or silence spit in fire. She told them about war, and healing, and choice, and when she finished, one girl raised her hand and said, "What happened to the girl after all that?" Alara smiled softly. She started writing her own story. The concert hall in Vienna had once been a sanctuary for monsters. Decades ago, its stage had showcased talent not for art's sake, but for appraisal for inspection by predators hidden behind opera glasses and polite applause. Back then, girls like Alara were molded into performances. They were not seen, only priced. But tonight, the Nocturne Initiative had reclaimed the space. Alara stood just behind the velvet curtain, her hands folded calmly. Beyond the stage, 100 faces waited: diplomats, survivors, journalists, and musicians. Some held programs, others clutched tissues. All of them waited not for a performance, but for truth. She wasn't here to entertain. She was here to break the silence that had nearly broken her. It had been almost 18 months since the world changed. Interpol had concluded its final sweep of the trafficking network. Over 400 individuals had been arrested across 17 countries. Dozens of institutions, singing schools, art academies, elite cultural programs had been exposed as fronts. A global reckoning had begun. Alara's testimony had become the centerpiece. She'd spoken to the International Criminal Tribunal. Her words broadcast across courtrooms and camera screens. Calm, composed, brutally honest. She told them about the marble floors, the chandeliers, the piano, about Vivian, about Madame Isolde, about the auction. And when she finished, she looked straight at the judges and said, "I am not what they made me. I am what I chose to become." The world had listened, but public justice could never heal what had been done in private. That would take time and love. After the trials, Lucien vanished for 3 weeks. No calls, no letters. Alara let him go. He returned to his family's ancestral estate in Ambrisliste's resting place, where he spent days in the vineyard she once dreamed of restoring. He left a note in the soil for the sister I couldn't save, and the girl who saved herself. When he returned to Geneva, he knocked gently on Alara's door. No words, no declarations. He just opened his arms, and this time, she stepped into them first. The Nocturne initiative had expanded beyond anything they'd imagined. Geneva was the flagship, but now homes had opened in Palermo, Marseille, and Cape Town, each one led by survivors, women who had once been auctioned, now creating sanctuaries. Their mission wasn't to erase the past. It was to name it, to defang it, to sing over it. On quiet evenings, Alara would play piano in the great hall, sometimes joined by Claire, sometimes Meyer, sometimes the new girls who dared to believe they could be musicians too. Each note was a prayer, a protest, a promise. In a small drawer in the Geneva villa, Alara kept Vivian's pendant, the golden bird. It no longer choked her. It no longer shimmered like mockery. Now, it reminded her of paradox. Vivian had been both jailer and protector, both victim and participant. She had chosen Alara's buyer, and in doing so, given her daughter the only kind of future she could envision. It wasn't forgiveness Alara felt, not entirely, but it was understanding, and it was freedom. She wore the pendant on days when she testified before the UN, and on nights when she played the piano for girls who still couldn't speak. It reminded her even the heaviest cages could be broken. Even the most twisted love could hold a seed of salvation. The velvet curtain lifted. Alara stepped into the light. The audience hushed. She wore no diamonds, no silks, just a midnight blue gown that flowed like water, and the golden bird at her throat. Her fingers hovered above the keys of a grand piano. Then she played, not Chopin, not Bach, her own composition, a piece called The Cage and the Sea. It told the story of a girl who had never known her own name, who had been raised for display, who had been silenced, and who found her voice. As the final note lingered, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. But Alara didn't bow. She stood tall, eyes calm. She had not come to be adored. She had come to be heard. Months later, she stood on a beach in Sicily, barefoot in the surf. The breeze tangled her hair, and Lucien's hand was warm in hers. "You still wear it?" he said, nodding to the pendant. Alara smiled faintly. "It's a reminder of her, of all of it." Lucien studied her. "If you could go back, choose a different life, would you?" She turned to him. "No," she said, "because I wouldn't be here, with you, with them, with myself." He nodded. They stood in silence for a long time, watching a flock of birds rise against the evening sky. "They're flying south," Lucien murmured. "They always return," Alara said, "but they never land in the same place." He looked at her, and in that look was every word he hadn't yet said. "You're free now," he whispered. She squeezed his hand. "No," she corrected gently. "I've always been free. I just didn't know how to fly." In cities round the world, girls who were once reduced to inventory now performed on stages they choose. studied in schools they loved, and spoke in languages no longer programmed into them but born from them. And when they sang, danced, wrote, or played, it was no longer to impress, or seduce, or survive. It was to say, we were caged, we were sold, we were silenced, but we are still here, and we are not done singing.